Hello, everyone. I'm pleased to be with you today, speaking from good old rural Huron County at the farm here with Ray Bollman. And Ray has for many years been a leader with Stats Canada and in the rural community in terms of analyzing the statistics that come from Stats Canada. And if you have read anything about rural Canada over the last, well, probably 30 years, it seems to me, Ray, it's probably a connection to you in some ways in terms of the way it's come together. And Ray currently lives in the Annapolis Valley, but has appointments at Brandon University and at Memorial University as well. So we're really thrilled to have you with us today to share some of your experiences, Ray.
Yes, it's a pleasure. I had to do some studying to find out what I know about Huron County. So I know a bit more now than I did 2 weeks ago.
Well, that's fantastic. And what we're going to do is really go through 3 questions in roughly 30 minutes or so. We'll talk about generally what's happening in rural Canada with COVID-19 and your impacts, and maybe beyond COVID-19 as well, some of the key trends that are happening there. Then secondly, we'll bring a specific focus to Huron. You've looked at some of the data. And then thirdly, we'll try to come away with a bit of an understanding what the lessons might be from that as it relates to the future. And so with that, I'll just, this will be a conversation format, but so what do you see happening in rural Canada these days as you look at the data, Ray?
Well, I usually start with the demography. I think it was David Foote said demography explains at least 30% of everything. And from time to time, I update Ontario's demography for the Rural Ontario Institute for their focus on rural Ontario fact sheets. And so I said, I better go and look at some more. And most recently, the population in non-metro census divisions in Ontario, like Perth and Huron, started to increase. And I hadn't looked at the data for 2 or 3 years, and I was a bit surprised. And generally, it's not because there are more babies, and it's not because there are more immigrants. It's because more people are moving into non-metro census divisions from elsewhere. And generally, they're not moving back from Alberta. They're moving from more metro places or moving from cities into the non-metro places. And that's just recently in the last 2 or 3 years, which is bigger than it always has been some, but it's bigger in the last 2 or 3 years. And I was a bit surprised. I don't live in Ontario, so I can't feel it. So I have to look at the data to see it. And I had not been looking at the data recently. So
I must say, when looking at some of the stats you sent to me, I was also intrigued by it because, you hope or like to think that that might be happening in some ways. Yep. And then to actually see it in the numbers is kind of reassuring because it certainly leads to a bit of a different discussion than we would have had even 5 years ago around what was happening in some of our rural communities.
Well, as you know, Perth, the census division, has had population increase, maybe flat for a while, then population increase again. But Huron's been relatively flat, in fact, declined maybe somewhat up to 2012. Mm-hmm. And then 2012 to 2019, quite a remarkable increase given the historical patterns. So probably everybody on this conference call knows that. I didn't know that. Mm. And so the numbers are in that chart I sent you, just how big the increase has been.
Mm-hmm. And I'll share some of those charts with people as well, which I think they'll find interesting. So what do you think is the key thing there? You mentioned it's people coming from non-metro areas, but
yes,
any insight as to what you think is causing
coming
that?
from metro areas to
sorry, yes.
cities, to the countryside, to smaller places. And quicker answers, I don't know. I looked at the kids, 16-year-olds, and Huron County has always been losing 16-year-olds. If you say when they're 16, how many left when they're 17, and how many left when they're 18, right up to 24, which if they're coming back, they've probably come back, and they don't come back. So over that, 8-year period, Huron County might lose 300 people a year in one age group, starting when they're 16, maybe 1,000 people at the end of 8 years, you've lost 300. But that decline has gone down. That loss has become less. So Huron County is keeping more of its youth, rural youth, if you will. It's a bit different in Perth. The exit of rural youth from Perth has been less over time, but still about 300, but the population is bigger, so the percentage is less. So part of the increase is just fewer youth leaving, but that's not all of it. It's other people moving in. And then I ran out of energy to go and look at other age groups. it's there in the data if I could figure out if it's F11 or F12 that I push so to go and find it. So.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting though that transition and what it means in terms of the future of a community, I suppose. So that is a key demographic trend. Are there other national trends or other trends that affect rural communities generally?
Well, generally, especially just listening to the news all across the country on people in nursing homes and seniors residences and being the focus of COVID-19. And so policy needs to do something. And there are all sorts of ideas out there what the policy might be. But the demographics, regardless of COVID, are quite striking. I looked at Ontario, it's got the number of people 80 to 89. I think in that group, they'll need a different type of seniors residence than people 90 years and over. They'll want different types of facilities in the seniors residence or nursing homes or whatever. So the folks 80 to 89 in Ontario are going to double in the next 18 years.
Wow.
The demand for whatever people want at 80 to 89, maybe it's seniors apartments, maybe it's assisted living, and maybe they want home workers coming into their home, maybe they'll all be happy and healthy. But whatever it is, the demand will double in 18 years.
Huh.
And the population 90 and over is half the population 80 to 89, but that population is going to double too. So the housing requirements, the seniors care requirements for the population 90 over will double. Now, if you don't have the resources to do anything, that's a problem. If you have the resources to do something, there may be an opportunity. Can Huron County, Perth County create facilities that provides employment for local people and look after your own, if you will? And I've been to Huron County, and I think lots of people would like to come from the city, even if they're 80 or 90, and live in the quiet, quote unquote, quiet of Huron County. And you might have distributed, not large personal care homes, but smaller personal care homes distributed around the county, would be linked in terms of their health care or their management or their protocols or standards, if you will. So there might be an opportunity there to attract people from the rest of Ontario. Now, they move away from grandkids, so you might have to bring grandkids too. But,
well, I was going to reflect on what's interesting with statistics and numbers. There are some which are purely speculative. Like, we don't really know how many immigrants will come to this country. We really don't know how many babies will be born. But aging populations are something that we can be a lot more confident in, right?
Yeah.
And how that impacts the future. So are there other key demographic trends that you would flag that's got sort of youth and the elderly? Other key things to flag?
The one calculation I borrowed from somebody else, obviously, how many people are going to be going on to the labor market in the next 10 years?
Oh, yes.
So if you look at the age group 10 to 19, by the time they're 20 to 29, they should be getting into the labor market. Now, they might have kids, or they might go to school, so they won't be in the labor market right away. And compare that to the people 55 to 64, who 10 years from now will be 65 to 74. They should be moving out of the labor market. And maybe you and I will keep working and try to combine a pension and so on. So not everybody leaves, but it's an indicator. So if you go back to the 1990s, 100 or 150 people, 150 to 200 people, depending where you are in Canada, were coming onto the labor market for every 100 leaving.
Wow.
And so there's quite an interesting supply relative to the demand, because if these people retired, only one person retired, but there's two people looking for their job. 100 people retired, there's 200 people looking for the job.
Right.
Then in about 2008, it became flat. Every time one person retired, there's one person coming onto the labor market. And now it's down to about 75 or 80%. In some rural places, below 75%. But I think Huron County was about that. You'd have to check the numbers. So in terms of the number of people thinking of retiring, 65 and up, the people coming onto the labor market, 20 to 29, every time 100 people are looking to retire, 75 people are looking for a job in the county. And so I suspect in your county even now, you got more we're hiring signs, help wanted signs, and
Yes.
it's just because of that demographic. And it's quite dramatic how in 20 years it's gone from 100, 200, 150 down to 100, down to 75 coming onto the workforce for every 100 retiring.
That's a remarkable trend, isn't it, in terms of what it
Yeah,
means to people in the
yeah,
local level and businesses
yeah.
and local government and finding people to fill positions and so on. And it's so the solution to that, if there is a solution, is I'm assuming what you can do is focus on immigration and anything else you can do to attract people,
Yeah.
particularly people in working ages.
Yeah, and in your county, I didn't look at the ages, so maybe everybody coming into Huron County is retiring, but I think you are and could be expected to attract working age population from elsewhere in Ontario.
Mm.
Every time you do a survey to people in big cities, medium cities, small cities, where would you prefer to live? Big city people want to live in smaller cities, and small cities people want to live in smaller cities yet, and small cities people want to live in towns and so on. So people prefer the countryside, but of course you need a job, your spouse needs to have a job or a good life also, whatever the requirements are. You probably want a good school or a good community college, or a good university, I know, a good hockey team, or good fishing. Everybody wants something different. And I think Huron County has basically all of that.
Mm.
And so there's an opportunity there to attract people from elsewhere in Ontario.
Mm. Mm.
Numbers of immigrants coming into Huron County as a percent of the population is very low and
Mm.
hasn't changed for 20 years. It's the numbers are surprisingly small. But across non-metro census divisions in Ontario, the numbers are embarrassingly small.
Mm.
Nobody is going to the non-metro places in Ontario, they're going to the big cities. Now, maybe after they live in the big city for 2 or 4 years, then they're moving out to the countryside, and maybe that's what I'm seeing is the uptick in people moving to the countryside. There are people that they may all be immigrants that came to Toronto 2, 4, 6 years ago. I have not looked at that, so I don't know.
Yeah,
So,
anecdotally, it seems to me that some of that's happening in terms of the diversity of people that you see
okay.
relative to 2 decades ago. But what that actually looks like in terms of numbers would be worthy of looking at further. Do you see any anomalies to that trend? Any communities that are certainly I know in southern Manitoba there are examples of communities that are
Yes.
being successful in attraction and retention.
I,
Of
I
immigrants.
haven't looked at those numbers for a while. More recently, Charlottetown, it's 40,000. So I'm not sure from your point of view, it's a city or a small town. But, and Brandon, of course, with the Maple Leaf pork processing plant, when they put the second shift on, that was completely filled by immigrants. And Neepawa, the High Life, I think it's High Life still has a pork plant there, and they brought on a second shift. And they didn't start building houses soon enough, so there's a housing crisis in Neepawa, which is a town of 3,000 or 4,000 people, but a 2-shift pork processing plant there. So there are places, but specifically, I haven't looked at the numbers more recently.
It's interesting, close to where I live here in Huron. I'm from the little village of Blythe, was home for me originally. There's a new brewery that's established there. We mentioned that actually before we got started, and they went like overnight to 140 employees and bringing people coming in from as far away as London to work in the restaurant facilities. It's a real destination, and the challenges with providing housing for people. And I know that's the word housing crisis has been used in a variety of ways, not only in Huron. I've heard it mentioned in other rural counties in Ontario too, the notion of a housing crisis. And in some ways, perhaps it ties back to some of your earlier statistics or numbers around more people, shortages of labor and things of that nature, with people trying to find quality spaces. So it's interesting.
Yeah, and interesting, I do the work for the Rural Ontario Institute. You may know Norm Rigetley there. And every time we look at employment by sector, employment in construction is going up in rural Ontario. But the population really isn't going up much. But the employment in construction is going up. So a whole bunch of guesses, but I don't know. Maybe it's people living beside cities. Cities expand on the edge. So all the jobs are in the city, but the people living out in the 20 miles in the countryside are getting counted in the numbers where they live, but they drive to the edge of the city to work. So maybe that's it. Maybe there's new roads going in, maybe a mine is being built, a dam is being built someplace. I haven't looked at all those numbers. But in terms of the people moving into Huron County and into Perth, there's opportunity to build housing for them, as you're saying, or Blythe for that matter.
Yeah. Let's bring a bit more focus perhaps to COVID-19 and numbers from Huron County, generally speaking too. So what are some of the key things or trends you see impacting rural communities from the numbers in terms of COVID-19 and I realize there's some new data just released last week and that you've been, that's why we're recording this. Today is Monday and our meeting's on Friday, and you've recorded that because that data just became available on Friday. So what are some of the key things you're seeing happening?
And on that data, I think Norma Getley's in the process of posting a second special issue on COVID-19 and rural employment.
Okay.
And there's actually a couple of those charts in the PowerPoint I sent you. And so all across Canada, the big thing is the dramatic decline in employment in some sectors. It's retail trade. Lots and lots of shops are closed. Not because they wanted to be, they were told they had to close. So the government forced a recession on everybody because those shops could not stay open. Information, culture, recreation has taken a big hit. Those are museums, anybody with a gym for recreation. I think a whole bunch of community newspapers have nobody wanting to add in the newspaper. So everybody went on furlough until the people want to advertise. So retail, trade, information, not construction. Accommodation and food, restaurant, drinking places, and also hotels. And the fourth one is, I've already forgotten. What was it?
You've got captured retail and you've captured restaurants. The sectors you mentioned that were doing still quite aggressively, relatively well, were of course construction, that the employment had not been impacted there in a substantive way.
Right.
I think
transportation and warehousing was the other one, which is, there's no bars open, so no taxi drivers can work the midnight shift to take people home. And school buses are shut down. And some places, intercity buses have shut down, or intercommunity buses have shut down. I don't think the shuttle to Houston Airport is coming out of Huron County very often these days. So a whole bunch of transportation workers. So those are the four big ones: recreation and information, accommodation and food, retail, and transportation. And so that's all across rural Canada, and I anticipate Huron is typical in the same thing. And so with the numbers most recently on Friday for the decline in employment from what would have been on an average May in 2017, 2018, and 2019, compared to the May in 2020, for Ontario, the numbers are down 13%. Urban, they're down 13% here. 13% drop. That's a big drop in employment. And but taking it by sector, I said, well, let's multiply those percent declines in accommodation times the number of accommodation workers in Huron County. The number of the decline in transportation times the number of transportation in Huron County. And you remember the numbers, and I don't, but it was something like an impact of, I think 10%, went from 30,000 workers in the census in 2016. And my guess was maybe you'd be down to a decline of 3,000 workers. I'll find it here. Well, I might find it slowly. Sorry, 5,000. So 3,000 workers in the census in Huron County, the Huron Census Division in 2016. Take all those percents times that. I'm saying maybe I would, back of the envelope guess is 5,000 people are at home without a job in Huron right now. And I can do the same calculation for Perth, but once again, I ran out of energy. And so that's an indicator of the size of the employment impact in the Huron County, in the Huron Census Division. And everybody's experiencing that.
Yes.
If you look forward, how fast will those places come back? Now, interestingly, in rural Ontario in May, there was a 2% increase from April, But in urban, there's a 0.6% increase. So rural started up a bit faster. I was expecting May to still coping down, and many people were expecting that. And in fact, Canada was sort of flat or up 300,000 jobs, whatever, but that's 1% or half of 1%, but 2% increase in rural. And so I don't know if that's just noise in the number, because these numbers always bounce around a bit. So it might be down to 0.5% in the next month as the numbers average out. But some things are turning around, but you still got a long ways to go up to the gap of 12 to 30, somewhere 40, 70% gaps in some things. So it's going to be interesting to see just how long it takes to come back. How many people want to go and sit in the Blythe pub elbow to elbow?
Yes.
You know, we want to be 6 feet away. Even though we trust everybody in rural Ontario, I don't know where you came from, you know. So they can have a big tent outside and everybody is 6 feet away. It'll work, but it'll depend.
So this is starting to get us into that discussion around the future too, but anything else you might want to flag for an area such as Huron that you think would be relevant in this? So, I mean, one thing we look at are those sectors that the employment has remained relatively stable. I think agriculture would be one of them. Notwithstanding, there's some sectors of the agricultural industry that are really challenged by this, particularly where they might rely on foreign workers.
Yeah.
Anything in that, Ray?
Yeah, the quirky number in the May 2020 numbers for agriculture, quite a dramatic decline when you expect agriculture to be hiring more. The labor force survey only picks up people living in private dwellings, not motels and not bunkhouses. And most temporary foreign workers, I think, live in what we call collective dwellings on farms. But maybe people working 12 months a year for greenhouses and so on are living in private dwellings, renting a house, renting an apartment someplace. But still, the 24% decline month over month in agriculture, I shouldn't say I don't believe a Statistics Canada number, but I'm hesitant because I'm thinking as the numbers bounce around, that's a bounce down. You know, you say 19 times out of 20, you believe the numbers, and I think this is the 19th time. This is the 20th time. I believe the previous 19 numbers. So I'm waiting for another number to find out if Stats Canada is right, or I'm guessing maybe there's just noise in the data.
So I was gonna say, so if we start to think about recovery and some things happening perhaps at the moment, but what do the numbers tell us about what that future might look like? And I know it's trying to crystal ball things, but you're in as good a position as any to think about that.
I only know what I read in the newspaper, which is, can we get some healthcare workers back to, you know, fix your teeth or to do elective surgery? My spouse recently had a small procedure on her eye, and the doctor had access to the hospital, so it was easy to get in and out. He said, now if we have to go to my office, every time you go to a different room, somebody's got to wipe it down. And there's no room in the waiting room for people to sit 2 meters apart. So you'll have to line up in front or in the parking lot. He said he'd have to work 14 hours a day to put the same number of people through his office as he used to do, basically in 7 hours, right? And so how is the system going to, there's a backlog. We had a backlog before COVID. Now the backlog is 2 or 3 months longer. And then it's going to take twice as long to deal with all of these elective surgeries in lineups. I mean, even getting to an appointment in a restaurant. Every restaurant is going to be half the number of people, right? And getting my hair cut, I think I need a haircut, is going to take half the number of people. So all of these places, you know, are they going to have half the number of workers? Are they only going to earn half the income? Can they pay 100% of the rent with half the workers, half the rent, half the revenue? So the future is murky to me. I don't know how it's going to come back. And part of it is how fast the health authorities say, yes, I guess you can open. How fast the Minister of Health and the Premier are going to say, okay, I'm taking a chance, there's not a big second wave. Then how fast are you and I going to be confident to sit elbow to elbow in the Blythe bar, for heaven's sakes, knowing you're a man about the world, and sometimes I have been, and who have we seen in the last 2 weeks, you know? So there's fear after everybody says we can get together. So it's going to take a long time to come back. Now, that's what I get from reading the newspapers. Everybody listening to this knows that already.
Yeah.
So I spent so much
Well,
time.
it is interesting though to try to break it down and think about the different sectors, and
Yes.
you know, things like tourism and hospitality and transportation that you mentioned, and retail, and the challenges they have faced and will continue to face for a period of time, and yet our ability to also look at things starting to happen in some of these sectors, and realizing that I mean, people want it to get back to normal as quickly as we can, but notwithstanding the permanent need to think about public health and what that might look like.
I suspect most of the people at the Blythe Bar are from Ontario. If you look at bars on the waterfront, bars anywhere, but bars on the waterfront in Halifax, in the summer, more than half of their people come from cruise ships that stop in Halifax. You know, I think it was the Prime Minister said, no cruise ships in Canada until everything freezes over, right? Until it's too cold for a cruise ship to come in October sometime. Yeah. So half of the bars in, you know, they weren't going to have half the people there. And half the Nova Scotians would be there. So there's going to be a quarter of the people there. You know? So really different impact in different places.
Yeah, a long time recovering that particular sector. Well, those have been fantastic comments, Ray. Is there anything else you might like to offer by way of a summary reflection?
Well, I think the other thing coming is, well, two things coming. I posted a picture of my daughter's baby, right? It was born in the middle of COVID. So there was a case of Lysol wraps, and my daughter put the baby beside the Lysol wraps. So that's a perfect COVID baby picture. Yeah. I mean, this baby was born on April 14th. But thinking of babies in COVID-19, everybody's being constrained to be at home for a couple of months now. So will there be a baby boom 9 months from now?
Well, historically, that probably would have been the case.
I don't know what's going to happen. But the other thing I sent along was, in the notes I sent you, was Statistics Canada has been doing non-probability web surveys, and they try to weight it for age and sex to try to get it back. And a lot of them about mental health. And I think there's going to be a mental health epidemic after the pandemic. How many of us are on the edge of post-PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder? Because, you know, we've had just different social interactions, we've got different constraints, we've seen stuff, experienced stuff that we would not have wanted to. So there's just a whole bunch of things, you know. And so you're a group with United Way, and they just might want to look at some of these numbers and saying, yes, you know that, because you know in your community that mental health issues are going up. If the newspapers are telling you that. Here are some numbers that say how big or how small it is across Canada, and to make the point that some numbers to quote to saying, folks, it's this big, we need to worry about it. You know, you're asking Canadians, are you really concerned about the impact of COVID? Well, 36% were very or extremely concerned about their own health, but more, 54% were really concerned with the health of a member in their household. And so that stress that your own health, but you're more stressed about the person in your household. What else, you know, how many people will be able to get through, even with the CREB, with their financial things? Well, 29% or 26%, depending on the calculation, likely do not have financial resources to get through, was it 2 months of no income? Everybody receives a CRB, most people do. But there's the starting fact. They just can't get themselves through 2 months. After the 2 months, will they get a job? I don't think all the nighttime taxi drivers are going to have a job for quite a while. There's an article saying that, you know, if you have lower self-perceived mental health, you feel your mental health is lower, you're more likely to have an increase in cannabis, alcohol, and tobacco. And I think everybody on this call will know that. But there is, you know, the numbers are there. what's another number? 52% saying their mental health is somewhat worse or much worse since this physical distancing started. So over half are saying their mental health is worse. And for people to admit that, it's good. I'm not sure how many people fail to admit it on the survey, but among youth 15 to 24, 64%, almost 2/3 are saying their mental health is worse. And I would have thought it'd be old codgers like myself who would be more worried about the dying because, you know, people at my age, 70 plus, are a high probability of dying, and kids 15 to 24 might get it, but low probability of dying. 64% are worried about the impact of it. So it's an interesting reverse to what I would have expected. If you have a major, what's major impact? If your financial situation changes, if there's a major change in your financial situation, what are you worried about? Well, 61% are worried about the ability to cooperate and support one another. 61% are worried about social disorder. And that was before the TV social disorder started in the last 2 weeks. And so on. Immigrants is another group that's higher worry, and people with lower educational attainment, higher worry, partly because more of them have lower incomes. So it's the mental health impacts that Statistics Canada is just documenting, people reporting it, self-perceived mental health. They're not diagnosed as mental health specifically. I don't think they're asking, have you been diagnosed with any mental health thing? Just what you're feeling. But some evidence, I think, for your stakeholders to talk to everybody in the census division and say, you know, we need to think of different ways of support. I don't know if it's money or networks or volunteers or some sort of a festival or drive-in theater and everybody 6 feet apart and free popcorn. I don't know what it is, and maybe it's all of the above. So the mental health issues, I think, are here, and they're going to get worse.
Those are really good comments, I think, to conclude with, because it's a sector of healthcare that we don't always give the attention it deserves. And I think in this particular situation with the virus and what it means for people, I reflected myself, I think I've not been into a grocery store per se since things happened. It's all curbside pickup, and how that changes both our economy, but also changes our approach to life, and what does that mean to people. And we're fortunate to be here where we are, where we've got time and space, but not everyone does, particularly in larger towns or cities for that matter. It's a very different world. So with that, Ray, I'd like to thank you very much for your contributions to our discussion today. I'm sure people will enjoy the insight that you've provided in terms of understanding what's happening at a national level with rural communities, but more specifically what's happening in the communities that many of us live and work within. And again, to thank you for that insight, and look forward to the continued discussions that we will have with people on Friday. So thanks again, Ray.
Thank you for the invitation to learn about Huron on Perth.
Absolutely.
Thank you.